Welcome to this evening's pros cons presentation. I'm Kathy Miller, co-chair of Voter Services for the League of Women Voters of Palo Alto, and I'm today's Zoom moderator. This event is sponsored not only by the League, but also co-sponsored by Congregation Betham's Pursue Justice Committee. Thank you for joining us today for a nonpartisan presentation about the pros and cons of the statewide ballot propositions and local ballot measures that will be on the ballot this fall. Events like this help us to fulfill one of the League's main missions, providing voters with the knowledge and confidence to participate in our democracy. Today's presenters will be Ellen Smith and Chris Witzel. They have carefully studied this year's ballot propositions and local measures, and they will share with you what they have learned. For each proposition, after they have made a presentation, we will take a few minutes for them to answer your questions. You will please type your questions into the Zoom Q&A box. The chat function is disabled, so you should only use the Q&A option. I should also like to mention that we have enabled closed captions, so if you'd like to see those, you can turn them on at the bottom of the Zoom screen as well. Also, because this is a Zoom webinar, only the presenters and I will have our microphones activated. This event is being recorded and will be posted to the League's YouTube channel, the link to which will be found on our website, LWVPaloAlto.org. Now I would like to turn this over to Ellen and Chris.
Sorry. Yeah, next slide, please. And then the next one. Okay, so sorry, thank you, Kathy. And as Kathy said, our primary aim is to encourage the informed and active participation in government. And we're here tonight wearing our voter education hat to give you this impartial, nonpartisan presentation about the ballot measures, which we have, as she said, studied, and we present not only background information, but the details of the measures themselves and the selection of arguments that are being made by those who support and oppose the measure. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, so we're very fortunate to live in a state that actually wants you to vote. And you should by now have received your large ballot guide from general election guide from the state, your local guide from the Santa Clara County Registrar of Voters. And at least today I received my actual ballot in the mail. So you should keep your eye out for that as well. There are a number of ways that you can vote, and these are described here partly, and you can find other information about that in the ballot material that you've been sent. Two things I would like to point out. All ballots must be returned by November 8th. If you are mailing it, it must be in the mail and postmarked by November 8th. If you're leaving it at one of the drop boxes or vote centers, it has to be there by 8 p.m. And if you are using the envelope to mail your ballot or put it in a drop box, you must sign it on the outside where it asks for your signature exactly as you're registered, that same way you've used your name to register. And as of today, we know it's also very important that you put the date on your ballot as well. There's a lot of information about registration and tracking your ballot that you can also find by looking at these some of these websites, and we can come back to some of this at the end if you have questions. Okay, next slide. There are other resources at our website. There's a published Easy Voter Guide, which you can find on the website. There's Voter's Edge, which is produced by the League of Women Voters of California, an online compendium of just about everything. You put in your address, you get your full ballot, you get all kinds of information about endorsements, the top 10 contributors that have been supporting or opposing ballot measures, and so forth. Again, we can come back to this at the end if you have any questions about voting and registration. So next slide. What's on the ballot this time? We have 7 statewide propositions and 2 local measures. One of the state measures is a referendum, and we'll explain that when we get to it. All of these measures require a simple majority to pass, just 50% plus 1. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris to tell us about Proposition 1.
Thanks, Ellen. So the first thing you'll see at the top right, there's a red CA symbol. That means it's a constitutional amendment. And this one Prop 1 is about the right to reproductive freedom. So what it says is the state shall not deny or interfere with an individual's reproductive freedom in their most intimate decisions, which includes their fundamental right to choose to have an abortion and their fundamental right to choose or refuse contraceptives. So the background, as you probably remember, in June, the US Supreme Court ruled that abortion is not a federally protected right. It is, however, legal in California up to a fetal viability. And after that, if necessary, to protect the life or health of the pregnant individual. And so I believe that's the law of 2002 called the Reproductive Privacy Act. And 9 states have provided constitutional rights to abortion. 12 have statutory protections, like as in California. 9 states have passed new restrictions on abortion, and some are expanding. One thing to notice is the text of this proposition is very short, but it ends with nothing herein narrows or limits the right to privacy or equal protection. Those are the reasons why Wade had been considered law and the Supreme Court said no longer applies. Okay, next slide. So supporters say that abortion rights are being attacked in multiple states, and we need to assure it as a inviolable right. Reproductive medical decisions should be kept where they belong, with individuals and their healthcare providers, using science, facts, not political arguments. And the opponents will say that women already have the right to choose under California law currently, and this proposition prohibits common sense restrictions on abortion, including those limiting late-stage abortion, requiring pre-abortion counseling, or requiring parental notification or approval. So what I would like to make sure, so you probably, so the supporters are getting, as of late last month, the supporters were contributing more to this this measure than the opponents. Now, I'm sure you all know who are the supporters and opponents, so I'd like to move on to questions.
Yes, any questions anyone who wants to put in? Oh, someone asked, can we get a copy of these slides? We're making a recording of it that we'll post. I hadn't had plans to post the slides, but perhaps we could put them on our website. I'm not sure if that's the plan though. Any other questions about this? I mean, I have the question of, I see the opponents say that this would, prevent the limitations on late stage abortion, but is that actually true?
The proposition states what, if you go to the prior slide, that is 1/3 of the proposition. The middle third AR says, so there's no mention of any of these current limitations in the proposition. They're just not there.
However, I would add that you have the Constitution and you have statutory law, which expands on the Constitution. The limitations, such as for fetal viability or the life and health of the mother, they exist in California law. And I think the argument by those who support it said that this doesn't necessarily exclude that.
Okay. Any other questions on Prop 1? Otherwise, we'll move on. Okay.
Okay, so then we jump to Propositions 26 and 27, which are probably the ones you've heard the most about, and we're going to deal with them sort of together. because they would both expand gambling and legalize sports betting in California, but in different ways. Both do require a constitutional amendment. Now, we have the situation where we have two propositions on the same subject. It's possible they both could pass. And when that has happened, generally speaking, the one that gets the most votes, that would be the one that would prevail if there was any conflict, or it might lead to court cases to sort out because these propositions are actually quite different. At any rate, they're becoming one of the most expensive ballot measures ever, or issues ever waged in California. So what would Proposition 26 do? This would legalize sports betting on site. That means in person at Indian gaming casinos and licensed racetracks. And sports betting is defined as a wagering on the results of professional, college, or amateur sport and athletic events, with the exception of high school sports or any event featuring a California college team. Individuals must be 21 years old to participate. It would also legalize roulette and dice games at tribal casinos, which are currently not allowed. There would be a 10% tax on the profits from the racetracks and additional revenues from the casinos based on their compacts with the state, but their increased revenues would mean increased return to the state. It also adds a new way to enforce certain regulations, particularly against card rooms. So as a background, and this applies in both 26 and 27, so we don't need to repeat it. Currently in California, it's legal to gamble in casinos, to wager on card games in licensed card rooms, to bet on horse races or charitable bingo games and raffles, to play the state lottery and online daily fantasy sports. There are 66 casinos in California, which must be on tribal land. There are 84 card rooms, which are generally located in more urban areas, and there are 4 permanent racetracks. 30 states and the District of Columbia do allow sports betting. So what would the impact of this be? There would be increased revenue to the state, potentially reaching tens of millions of dollars. There would be some regulatory cost, which would be less than the revenues. And it should be noted that most of the money would go into the general fund. There is an allotment of a certain amount to go for gambling, addiction programs, and a certain amount to enforcement. So next slide, please. So the supporters say this would be tens of millions of dollars more for the state of California. And Californians should have the opportunity to participate in sports wagering. And this does it in the most responsible way because you're required to be in person. You have to go to a casino, you have to go to a racetrack. And therefore, it's much easier to keep young people under 21 from betting. These casinos have become an important part of the American Indian economies, and many of the tribes share some of their revenues with tribes that do not have casinos. And the card rooms are often thought to have little oversight and not sure that the money is being properly handled. So as you notice here, $122.8 million, primarily from the gaming tribes themselves. Opponents say gambling is a serious addiction. This would massively increase the amount of gambling allowed in California and would really benefit those large tribal casinos. It might be used to put some card rooms out of business, which is why the California Contract Cities Association voted against it, because they do get a great deal of revenue from these card rooms. Some people argue that it would expand horse racing as more people went to racetracks, and that's a cool sport for the horses. Here we have $43.1 million in contributions, primarily from casinos, and that means not Indian casinos, but other betting casinos. Okay, so now let's take a look at 27.
Let me just say, we'll come back to questions about 26. We're going to do 26 and 27 together and then take questions.
All right, so what this proposition does is it legalizes online and mobile sports wagering for persons 21 and older. This is what, oh, you can't see it. Yes, this is a telephone. That's probably the most common kind of mobile sports wagering we would see. The online gambling company must be associated with a federally recognized Indian tribe, and the company must already operate in 10 other states, which severely limits the number of gambling companies that qualify. 10% of the sports wagering revenues and licensing fees, and the licensing fees are not inconsiderable, 10% are taxed. The tax, rather, is 10%. 85% of the revenues would go to cities and counties for homelessness and related programs. And there are new regulatory consumer protection standards. In fact, there'll be a whole new agency. The Online Sports Betting Trust Fund will be created to monitor this. So the background facts are the same. And however, the difference in the fiscal impacts is it's basically 10 times that the estimates. All of these are estimates, but it could be mid-hundreds of millions of dollars for revenues, and the regulatory costs, particularly at the startup, when they're building the infrastructure to regulate it, could reach the mid-tens of millions of dollars annually. Next slide, please. So supporters say, of course, that this would generate millions of dollars in increased revenue for the states. It provides significant cash for non-participating tribes. 85% of the revenues that come after taxes is going to go for homelessness, and 15% for non-participating tribes. Using revenue, this revenue for homelessness is a win-win for our state, and the supporters, the commercial gaming non-tribe casinos and Major League Baseball have contributed 170 million and probably more since that date. Opponents can cite a report from the National Council on Problem Gambling that online sports bettors are up to 5 times more likely to develop problem gambling than other gamblers. It would give
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm afraid she's frozen.
online gambling is not the solution to homelessness, and it threatens the current tribes with casinos who are producing 23 billion in economic activity and have over 180,000 California jobs. So the Indian gaming tribes are opposing this, and they have contributed over $213 million in contributions. Easy for me to say. So if you go to the next slide, we're going to use this, I think, Ellen, for Q&A, but I'd like to point out 2 corrections. One is the regulation changes where it says none under Prop 26. That's not true. There's some protections to prevent people under 21 from participating. It will have audits, and civil lawsuits can be raised if someone sees an irregularity. The other correction is under beneficiaries. It says 15% to enforce gambling regulations. That does represent the estimated startup cost, and it's estimated to be about 5% thereafter. So back to you, Ellen.
Okay, so we've set up this chart so you can see kind of the major ways in which these 2 propositions are contrasted. But when you're looking at this, the first question you want to ask yourself is, do you support the idea of sports betting in general? And if your answer to that is no, then you've answered your question for these propositions. But if you think it might be a good idea for better state revenues, for money for the homelessness, for everybody's chance to gamble if they want to, does one of these propositions do the job in a way that you would like to see it done? And if the answer to that is yes, you should vote for that one. But if you don't see something you like, you always can vote no. So I would say just very quickly, if you're, and if you have questions now, please be putting them into the chat. The biggest differences are that Prop 26 would legalize on-site betting. You have to be there in person. Prop 27, it's online betting, mobile sports. You can be anywhere with your computer. The taxes are somewhat similar as such, but the amounts of revenue are vastly different. I should also point out that there probably is a huge amount of money spent on illegal betting all the time with bookies and various other informal ways of betting. So this could potentially tap some of that. The revenues, as I say, are dramatically different, and the beneficiaries for Prop 26, most of the money goes to the general fund. For Prop 27, most of it goes to programs that are to aid the homeless. So if you have any questions, please share them now, and we'll see if we can answer them for you.
We do have a couple of questions. One from Mandy Eisner. How does Prop 26 directly benefit the Native American community? And I'm taking that to mean, not necessarily benefiting the tribes as an entity, but the community itself, if you guys know.
Well, I assume it's the argument that casinos have provided a tremendous amount of money for tribes that can run them. As I said, many cases they share the revenues with tribes that don't have the capacity or the location to have a casino. But again, a lot of it goes back to your feelings about gambling in general. And is this the way, it's a trade-off, is this the way that Indian economies should be defined?
The second question was, can you repeat the percent of Prop 27 money going to homelessness and to tribes who don't participate? I believe it was 85% of the tax revenue would go to homelessness and 15% to the tribes who don't participate.
Yeah, this all shows what the money that the state would get. Remember, if it's hundreds of millions of dollars coming in taxes, it's probably billions of dollars in actual money that's floating around being made bets on. Yeah.
Any other questions on these? We can also touch on this later if people have questions they think of as we go forward. I think with that, we're moving on to 28.
Okay. So Proposition 28 would provide additional funding for art and music education in grades K through 12. I'm sorry, I got the wrong page. This would require the state to set aside an additional amount of money specifically for art education that's equal to at least 1% of the funding that the state now gives to school districts under Proposition 98, which is a proposition that was passed by voters in 1988 and basically said the state should be giving about 40% of its budget to education. So this would be in addition to that funding. It does not provide a source. It just says you have to put that much more money in for art. And to address issues of inequity among school districts that we know exist between very wealthy districts and much less wealthy districts, 70% of the money would be allocated on the basis of enrollment, but 30% would be then targeted in addition to that money to go to lower income schools. So some background information, there are about 6 million students in California in public schools, grades K through 12. That includes charter schools. And about 60% of those students are classified as low income. And although the state law requires that music and art education be taught for all students in grades 1 through 6, and high school students are supposed to take one elective in the arts, actually only 1 in 5 public schools in California has a dedicated teacher, whether for traditional arts or some of the newer forms of expression that mostly have to do with computer options. So the fiscal impact would be increased education spending, specifically targeted to the arts. Next slide, please. So supporters say that too few schools provide for real art education, and that this education is helps to build the whole student, reasoning skills, personal life, academic life, and the extra money will help disadvantaged students who might not otherwise get the chance to develop skills or probably go on to careers in music and the arts. Now, there is no official opposition to this measure. There was not a ballot statement signed in opposition to it. But some people say that just locking in more money limits the ability of the legislature to deal with new circumstances or have any flexibility. So, any questions?
I don't see any questions on this. I'll give it another few seconds. Otherwise, we can move on. Again, if you think of a question for this one, we can answer it later.
Okay. Prop 29 is the dialysis clinics requirements initiative. And this, if this seems familiar, it's because there have been two other dialysis clinic propositions before, and we will show you a chart comparing them, but let's focus first on what this proposition says. It's saying that clinics need to have at least one physician, nurse practitioner, or physician assistant on site, and most of these places operate 6 days a week. In addition to reporting to the federal health authorities, they will be required to report dialysis related infections to the California State Public Health Department. And they're going to have to provide to patients and to the California State Department of Public Health a list of persons. Oh, well, patients get a list of physicians with ownership in interest of 5% or more, and the state will get a list of persons with ownership interest of 5% or more. This is because some clinics are both owned and operated by a physician. An important requirement is that clinics would need to apply in writing and get written consent from the California State Health Department before they could close or substantially reduce services to patients. And it prohibits refusing to care for a patient based on the patient's form of payment. In the background, we'll go over those two in a moment. There are about 80,000 dialysis patients using 650 dialysis clinics, 2 for-profit companies, and they're called DaVita and Fresenius. They operate almost 3/4 of them. The fiscal impact is that it probably would cost state and local governments money in the low tens of millions of dollars annually. Next slide, please. Okay, supporters are saying, hey, requiring a clinician, a healthcare provider to be present during a very dangerous procedure is a matter of patient safety, especially because dialysis clinics currently face fewer inspections than other health facilities, and deficiencies are often found. Big dialysis companies make billions of dollars annually and have a profit margin nearly 6 times that of US hospitals. In the case of DaVita and Fresenius, they're earning 16% profit margins. So the supporters, it's coming from the United Healthcare Workers West Union, and they've contributed as of late last month, about $8 million. The opponents say these clinics are using specially trained technicians, and every patient is under the care of their own kidney doctor, so more oversight is not needed. Prop 29 would take thousands of skilled medical staff from hospitals where they're needed and place them in administrative jobs. Voters rejected the two prior initiatives, and the funding against it comes from the two largest dialysis providers, and they've contributed $86 million as of a couple of weeks ago. And next slide, please. So let's look at what's new and different. Okay, the Prop 8, which failed by 60% no, it had nothing to say about staffing and clinicians. It did have something to say about profit caps and refunds. And the reporting was all about financials. It did require the state to consent to closing, did not allow discrimination on the basis of payment type, and the top supporters and opponents are the same as today. So last time the difference was from today is the difference between Prop 23 2 years ago and today's Prop 29 is it adds the option of nurse practitioner or physician assistant to having a physician on site. And of course, those two professions generally are paid less than physicians. The Prop 23 allowed an exemption if you could show that you can't find anyone in your area. Prop 29 adds a telehealth alternative. I think we all have experienced telehealth during the business of being able to talk to someone over the computer. Okay, so the reporting changed from just dialysis infections to also disclosing more about the ownership, and everything else is the same. Are there questions? Oh, Kathy, you've muted yourself.
Sorry. We do have one question on the previous measure proposition, but nothing so far on the dialysis one. Should I jump in with that one about the art and music in the schools now, I think, or hold it till the end?
Ellen, you're muted.
Sorry. The figure that's given about
Let me state the question. How much
Yeah,
money
oh,
is projected to be spent yearly on art and music in the schools? What percentage of the school budget will that be?
okay, the amount of money that is projected to be made available by the state for art and music education was that $800 million to $1 billion a year would be distributed on the basis of attendance among the schools. What percentage that would be of a school's budget is you'd have to look at each school district and recognize that wealthier schools probably already have some established programs. And so it's not possible to say what percentage it is because the actual instructional budget is set at the local level by each school district. But it would add perhaps $1 billion.
I think I have two people who have raised their hands in the attendees. Maybe I can allow you to talk if you have a question. Tracy Barrett, can you speak? You had a question? Did she mean to intend? I'm gonna lower your hand if you don't speak. I think you're muted.
She lowered her hand. So.
I think I lowered it.
Oh.
So did the other person lower their hand. Okay. Okay, let's move on. I don't think they, oh wait. Tracy Barrett, you've been, your hand is lowered, but you need to unmute. Okay, do you want to?
Sorry about that. So I just put it in the chat seems disabled, so I added it to the Q&A.
Yeah.
Yes.
So my question is related to Proposition 29. This keeps coming up and it's very unclear to me. I don't know how much you can say. I'm not really sure this spreadsheet captures it. But is Prop 29 pro-patient or pro-provider?
I think that it's pro-union. It's the workers who are pushing for it, and they would say it's pro-patient, but it's really hard to say what's accurate. It's not really a patient initiative. It's more of a union initiative with providers being opposed to it.
Okay, because in the past, it felt like it was marketed as if you didn't vote for it, there would be fewer dialysis clinics around and patients would suffer as a result of that. And so I don't know if that's just a reality of it, or if that is just sort of a threat.
I think it would have been that if you did vote for it, it would have been the providers saying, we're going to leave the state if you do this to us, right?
Yes.
That's my impression. Do you guys agree? Ellen or Chris?
My thought is you have to make a decision whether you think these providers would be willing to accept lower profit margins. And they also have to get permission to close.
That's helpful. Okay, because for a market as large as California, and if there's two companies that own 75% of that market, one would think it's pretty profitable.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
the profit margins on the two largest are 16%.
I think another fact that I remember coming across is that currently the clinics are required to be officially headed by an MD, but the job that is an administrative job, and they really it probably is about a 25% job. Whereas if you were required to have an MD on site, it would be 6 days a week for extended hours. So you would probably have to hire more than one person to fill that job. And so the feeling is that it would be a huge increase in the staffing requirements.
I see. All right. Thank you. I think you've answered my questions. I appreciate that. That was helpful.
You're muted, Kathy.
We also had a question from Julie Beer. Why are voters supposed to vote on medical issues? Are the two providers pushing these ballot issues to avoid responsibility for oversight? Well, the providers are against the measure. So sorry, hold on, Julie. I'm not sure I'm understanding your question. But in general, voters, if you're a voter and you read it, something and you say, why am I being asked to vote on this? I always figure you're totally entitled to vote no, just on the theory that the legislature should deal with questions like this rather than voters. But that is just one way to think about measures of this type.
And one problem with ballot measures is you take it or leave it. So it's not like putting a bill into the legislature and they argue about it and work out some compromise or make it add things to it you never thought of that you might need, or take out bad things. This is just somebody's idea of the way it should be. They get enough people to sign the petition, it qualifies to go on the ballot, and it becomes law exactly the way it's written. So this is one reason to think very carefully about initiatives. They often have things in them that are unintended or that just represent, in this case, maybe one point of view without considering some of the other aspects of the question.
There's also a raised hand by Sarah. Sarah, I'm clicking allowing you to talk, but you will then need to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so I have a question about the dialysis initiative.
Yeah.
It says it doesn't allow discrimination on payment type. I'm wondering how enforceable is that? I mean, would the clinics have some other way to refuse you if you can't pay?
My interpretation is it's about payment type rather than whether you can pay or not. It wasn't that didn't say if they can't reject you if you can't pay. How do you interpret that, Chris? I thought it maybe was, they can't reject you if all you have is Medicaid, or they can't reject you if all you have is Medicare, or that kind of thing.
Chris, you're muted.
It's speaking to whether or not you're a Medi-Cal patient or a private insurance patient. And of course, Medi-Cal pays very little and private insurance pays a great deal more.
Do you follow?
I don't know if they can, I don't know if they could have the option to just say, well, you better go to the emergency room.
No, I think the vast majority of people are paid by Medicare and Medi-Cal.
Yeah.
And even after 30 months, if you have private insurance, then you're allowed to go over to Medicare. So, I mean, the need for kidney failure is so we take care of these people. We have dialysis clinics. If you can get to one and you have Medicare or Medi-Cal, they have to treat you.
Okay, did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I think, someone asked, is there no oversight of the clinics currently for infections? I think you're implying, Chris, that there's federal oversight, but not state?
Well, the reporting has to, the reporting would be required not just for the federal level, but also at the state public health level.
If this were passed, but the
If it
current,
were passed. I'd have to read the fine print again to see what exactly is the current status.
no. Okay. Anything else on this measure, proposition, excuse me, before we move forward? I think that's good. Next is Prop 30.
Okay, so Proposition 30 would seek to reduce air pollution and provide funding for wildfire prevention by imposing a tax on incomes above $2 million. Basically, it would increase that tax by 1.75% on incomes above $2 million. And that means the money above $2 million that you earn. Up to $2 million, it's taxed at certain rates. And then only the money that exceeds $2 million would be taxed by this at this new level. It would go into effect in next January, which is important for tax years, and expire in 2043 or sooner if the state can meet certain levels of emission. It would be spent, 80% would provide subsidies and rebates on zero emission vehicles, cars, trucks, buses, and infrastructure for those vehicles, particularly charging stations, and 20% would go for wildfire management. It also provides that half the funds that are allocated for zero emission vehicles should be, and the charging stations should benefit low income and disadvantaged communities. The state government has a goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions to 40% below what they were in 1990 by the year 2030. And part of this includes a requirement that 90% of the miles driven by rideshare companies must be driven in zero emission vehicles also by 2030. And as you may have heard, the goal is that only zero emission vehicles will be sold in California after 2035. Remember, that doesn't mean you can't keep your old car. It just means you could not buy anything except a zero emission new car. Currently we're spending about $2 to $4 billion a year on firefighting, and spending for zero emission funds today is about $6.1 billion. for $10 billion over 5 years. Incomes above 2 million now taxed at a rate of 13.3%. So that would make that rate 15.05%, which I believe I've read would be the highest state income tax in the nation. And remember, there are states that don't even have any income tax. The total income tax revenue in California for 2021 was $130 billion. And California does rank high in the total burden of income tax. All of this money would be outside the general fund because it would go for the special purposes of firefighting and reducing air pollution. But it's estimated that it would raise about $3 billion to $4.5 billion for those efforts. So next slide, please. Next. Oh, sorry. Supporters say zero emission vehicles remain expensive. There aren't enough charging stations. We need to do more to get people to be able to buy these zero emission vehicles. Our existing programs are insufficient to do that. California's poor air quality is almost entirely due to automobile exhaust and wildfire smoke. We now have a wildfire season that lasts all year. One of the benefits of this is that the subsidy for buying a zero emission vehicle will go directly to the buyer of the car. It doesn't go to anyone else. We always like to say that this sort of money will come from those who are most able to afford it. It should be noted that a substantial part of the money that is being raised in support of this measure has come from the rideshare company Lyft. Opponents say we're already spending a huge amount of money on a climate investment, including $10 billion for zero emission vehicles. The grid is not ready for this amount of electrical use. This is a special interest carve out, and that's directed specifically at Lyft. They should be subsidizing their drivers, not asking the state of California to do it. And there's always the fear that the rich will leave if we tax them anymore. And if these are really priorities, again, they should be coming out of the general fund. So are there any questions for that one?
So far, I don't see any questions. Anyone want to speak up or raise a hand or put something in Q&A? Okay, moving on to 31 then.
Okay, the last of the propositions that are statewide. This is Prop 31, the flavored tobacco products ban referendum. Now, a referendum is about a law that is passed, Senate Bill 793, and it's being put to the voters. Should this law be put into practice or repealed? A yes vote says, let's keep this bill and make it and activate it. A no would repeal it. So the background facts is that this bill bans the sale of flavored tobacco products and tobacco product flavor enhancers. And there are some exceptions. Hookah tobacco, loose leaf tobacco, which I believe probably mostly goes into pipes, and premium cigars. And those are carefully defined, but they cost at least $12. And retailers will be fined for violating the law. Now, if we look among the smoking population in the US, 85% of teens are using flavored products. Nearly 60% of adults under 30 are using flavored products. And over 30%, well, 31% of adults over 30 are using flavored products. So clearly, young people seem to like, of the smokers, they seem to like this. One thing you should know about this referendum is that the tobacco companies paid to collect the signatures to create a referendum put to the voters. Next slide, please. Okay, so the supporters say big tobacco's trying to hook our kids using these flavored products. The PATH study, which is a long-term National Institute of Health study, found that all the youths who used tobacco products started with a flavored one. 81% started that way. And there's been 6 million or more in contributions, mostly from Michael Bloomberg and the Kaiser Foundation. The opponents say, hey, it's already illegal for anyone under 21 to use any tobacco. So flavored or not, this proposition is just targeting the over 21. It's going to drive more tobacco sales into the illegal market that already exists. And the opponents, who of course are the tobacco companies, have put in at least 21 million against it.
Any questions on this one?
Questions?
I'm not seeing any.
Oh, I'll ask a question. Does this include menthol as a flavored cigarette?
Yes, and so the fiscal estimates, when people are debating the fiscal impact, a large question is, will this cause menthol tobacco cigarette smokers to stop smoking, or just go finding illegal sources? And so that will determine what kind of fiscal impact it has on tax revenues.
Okay, move on to the local measures.
Okay, so there are two measures on your ballot that were put on by the city of Palo Alto. And the first one is Measure K, which is a local business tax. And this tax would authorize the city of Palo Alto to levy a tax based on the square footage that a business occupies within the city, up to a maximum of $500,000 a year. It begins at a lower rate, but by 2025 would increase to 7.5 cents per square foot. And after that, the rate and the annual cap are allowed to increase. The tax is supposed to stay in effect for 35 years. And in addition to businesses under 10,000 square feet, it would exempt nonprofits, grocery stores, unoccupied spaces, and transitory or pop-up businesses. And it's estimated this would generate up to $9.6 million per year by the time it's fully implemented in 2025. And the money, as noted, would all be going to the general fund. Next slide, please. So supporters say that the impact of the pandemic and the recession reduced Palo Alto's revenues by 20%, which led to cuts in services that we all remember. You know, the libraries were closed, not just because of COVID and lack of public safety, staffing, and so forth. There's a tremendous dip in the sales tax, which is one of the major local revenues. And it's not clear how that money is coming back. So we need some additional revenue to be able to keep our level of services going. Most cities in the Bay Area do have business taxes of some form, but Palo Alto has not. And this proposal does have ways to protect smaller businesses and limit the cost to larger employees. I'd also like to point out that business properties are relatively rarely reassessed. They don't change hands the same way the property changes hands when you sell your house. And so houses get constantly reassessed, businesses do not, and the proportion of commercial property against residential property as a source of property tax money has been declining dramatically. Now, in the process of developing this tax, in order to get it on the ballot, in the negotiations that went on, the business community agreed not to oppose it. But people still say that raising taxes in the time of inflation and possible recession is not a good idea. Palo Alto already spends a lot more money than most other cities. So suggesting we have plenty of funds and we really don't do this. And there's even a kind of value judgment in the way certain types of businesses are taxed or not taxed. Any question?
I'm not seeing any questions coming up. So let's move on to L.
Okay. Measure L is about natural gas revenue transfer. So what it's going to do is it's going to change the Palo Alto Municipal Code to affirm the annual transfer of up to 18% of the gross revenues of the city's gas utility into the general fund. You'll see it says affirm or continue. That's because this is what has been happening for many years. And this approval only applies to next year and onwards. So the background is that Palo Alto has annually transferred up to 18% of the gas utilities gross revenues generated by retail and commercial natural gas rates to the general fund for city services. And a few years ago, someone brought a lawsuit saying that this really constitutes a tax. And so last year, the Santa Clara Superior Court finally resolved this lawsuit, and they held that voter approval is required to continue transferring such funds to the city. And that's why this measure would start next year. Fiscally, this has been generating about $7 million in fund transfers to the general fund. And if this measure fails, the city will see a $7 million reduction in the general fund monies. Let's see. Oh, I should say that the way that this you will, if it passes, you'll see that you have your utility bill will now include yet another tax line that is about this natural gas revenue transfer.
But it's not an increase in rate, right? It's just
No, it's not an increase in a rate. It's just authorizing the transfer of funds and making it visible that this is essentially a tax, as according to the Supreme Court of the county. Next slide.
Yeah, I'm on it.
Okay. Supporters say transferring these funds is a very reasonable thing to do. The city runs the utility company, and some of the revenues rightly should go back to the city. And that the fees received have long supported these services. I'm pretty sure that it goes back to 1950. If it's not approved, the city will be short $7 million that they expected. Now, the opponents say that using funds collected for one purpose to fund other purposes is not a good thing, and that the gas utility is a monopoly, and so the transfer of funds is essentially a tax. And the city would be better served if natural gas charges were solely used to fund the utility. And this whole process lacks transparency. In addition, the pro people are saying that there's no cost increase to the customer. Monopoly is a misleading label, since Palo Alto utility charges less than PG&E. The cons say This is very sloppy accounting to mix funds. And why rely on gas, which is considered an unhealthy source of energy?
Okay, there's a question saying now that our local businesses are pretty much returning to pre-pandemic levels, has the general fund balance increased? Are you asking if it's back to where it was before? I think the answer is no, but has it? It's probably going back up. Does anybody know the answer to this?
I do not.
No, I don't either. And I don't know that I would assert that businesses are pretty much returning to pre-pandemic levels. I think one of the big hits or big changes as a result of the pandemic is a dramatic drop in the amount of business travel. And there was a lot of that business travel, restaurants, hotels, people coming to Palo Alto on business. And I don't think there are a lot of restaurants that have disappeared. I don't know that it's possible to say we're back to normal.
I did attend, or I guess they came to us, a couple people from the city came to the league to talk about this, and they showed us some charts that basically suggested that we are still well below pre-pandemic levels for our funds. But I can't, I wish I could show it to you, the chart.
Yeah.
They do have
If
it.
only we'd known, right? Yeah.
Any other questions? If that's correct, I think we're wrapping up, and I will show the final slide again with the basic information. Ellen, did you want to wrap up?
Yeah, just a reminder that there are all these resources out there for you. Voter's Edge, I can't recommend highly enough. We hope that you will check out the information you need, get your sample ballot out, or get your real ballot out. Mark up your sample ballot first if you want to, and then vote on your real ballot. Don't forget to do that, to tell everybody you know. Be sure to exercise their right to vote. It really is a precious and important right that we have.
And on that note, we'll stop the recording, and thank you for coming.
Thank you.